All right, everybody. I think our attendees are filing in, and I'd like to apologize for running a little bit late today. We had a couple things we wanted to make sure was ready for everybody before we got started. But my name is Jacob Trimble. I'm the Director of Planning here at St. Louis County, and I'm also the President of the St. Louis Metro section of the APA. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming today, and I'd like to thank our panelists. I have a couple announcements, and I'm going to turn it over to Hobie after which, because he is going to be our moderator for the panel today. But our April webinar is titled Held in Trust, an introduction to nonprofit land ownership in Missouri. And we've got a really great panel and a really great session for you today. But I just want to give you a couple of announcements. First, I'd like for everybody to mark on their calendars that the summer picnic is going to be occurring on June 21st. So make sure to put that on your calendars, and there will be additional information coming out from the section with save the dates and whatnot for you, as well as don't forget that next month our webinar has a pretty interesting panel. We're going to be having several speakers, one of whom is going to be Nolan Gray, the author of the arbitrary lines. So put that on your calendar, and there is information in the weekly e-blasts for you all. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Hobie and let him introduce our panelists and let us get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hobie Kropp, and I'd like to welcome you to our April Luncheon webinar, Held in Trust. We'll be joined today by Larry Levin of the Ozark Land Trust and the Missouri Land Trust Coalition, Carol Davitt of the Missouri Prairie Foundation, Bonnie Harper of Open Space STL, Abby Kinney of Multi-Studio, and Megan Freeman of the Marlboro Community Land Trust. So I'll turn it over. I think we'll begin with Larry Levin, and we'll start with a short video from the Missouri Land Trust Coalition. Sorry, everyone, about that. Go back to the beginning.
If you need me to narrate, Hobie, just let me know.
Okay. I think that might be a good idea.
All right. If you want to start the video, that's fine.
Okay.
Since it's my voice on the video anyway.
Sure.
Missouri boasts some of the most beautiful lands and waters in America. The Missouri Land Trust Coalition is a group of nonprofits known as Land Trust, which along with other conservation partners are dedicated to the protection and restoration of key natural resources and community landscapes across our beautiful state. Land trusts partner with landowners who want to voluntarily protect and restore their land for generations to come. From parks to forests, prairies to farms, watersheds to trails, the Coalition's land trusts bring professional and passionate leadership to ensure that these resources remain a major part of Missouri, contributing to our quality of life and to our economy. While each member operates independently as a separate nonprofit, we come together as a coalition to advance land protection for a resilient Missouri, with ideas and outreach about land protection and the importance of conservation. We also want to make it as easy as possible for landowners and the public to understand the benefits of protecting land and how you can be a partner in conserving and restoring Missouri's exceptional wildlife and natural resources. Our website, MissouriLandTrusts.org, offers information about Missouri Land Trust due and about each land trust's mission, programs, and land protection projects. There's even information about the potential charitable and tax benefits of protecting land. Contact information for all the individual land trusts, links to their websites, and a wide variety of other resources are also provided. Please visit the website and drop us a note if you have questions or want to discuss conserving land with one of our members. Thanks. We appreciate you having us today at the APA St. Louis section, and we're looking forward to talking to you about a wide variety of land trusts and what we do. Thanks, Hobie. And greetings from beautiful Washington, D.C., about a quarter mile from our nation's capital, and the same from the Supreme Court building. This week is the National Land Trust Alliance's annual Advocacy Days week. So land trusts from all across the United States are here in Washington today, advocating for a variety of programs that we are supportive of, including the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that almost passed Congress last year, but it still has tremendous momentum this year. The potential 2023 Farm Bill, which has a lot of potential benefits for protecting land and more. And today you'll hear from different kinds of land trusts and how they support community goals in a number of ways. We protect open space, habitat, natural resources, and human resource needs across the country. Over 60 million acres of land have been protected by well over 1,000 land trusts in the United States, and about 950 of them are members of the national group, the Land Trust Alliance. And you can see the link to the Land Trust Alliance right there on the slide that Hobie put up. And then again, the link to our state association. And our state association is an amalgam of a variety of organizations. And you, in the video, you got an idea of kind of who we are and what we do in a general sense. And we'll talk to you about what we do in a more specific sense, so you can see the diversity of the work that everybody does. Next slide, Hobie. Community conservation, which the Planning Association might be very interested in, is a phrase that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in addition to traditional open space, parks, and resource protection, communities are finding ways to protect resources on behalf of a wide variety of groups like seniors and veterans and indigenous populations and at-risk and in-need populations and much more. We had an article about this in our recent Ozark Holler publication for Ozark Land Trust, written by a member of the staff of the National Land Trust Alliance. And I can certainly make that available to our friends at APA if you are interested in looking at that. Next slide, please. So the work that Ozark Land Trust does, as we segue from kind of what land trusts do in general to what each of the groups does, we've been around almost 40 years and we protect over 31,000 acres of a wide variety of lands. And when you see a reference to working lands, that includes farms and ranches and beyond. We protect private lands and lands made available to the public. Each can be super important to protecting natural resources, particularly water resources. Protecting private lands along key bodies of water is just as important to clean water as publicly protecting them. And habitats and species in open space. About 80% of the work we do is with what are called conservation easements, which is a permanent agreement that limits development on a property to protect its conservation values. So the landowner continues to own the land, and the easement is tailored to the landowner's objectives. It could be for open space and forest. It can be for farm and ranch lands. It can be for prairies. It could be a wide variety of things. But the documents, it's important that the document be tailored to the needs of the landowner, because the landowner comes first in doing this, because without them, there's no protection. And because these agreements last forever. They run with the land. So they don't only just bind the landowner who puts the easement on the property, but all their successor and interests. And then it's the land trust responsibility to monitor and enforce the terms of that easement on a regular basis. And then we also own about 20% of our lands. We typically get them by donation. It says purchase, but almost all of them are by donation. And we then have an active role in managing them. Unlike a conservation easement, which is a negative enforcement document, in other words, us making sure that the landowner is not doing something that's prohibited by the easement. When we own lands, we create a management plan for those lands, and it's our responsibility as Ozark Land Trust to manage those lands actively. And then a third part of our work is what are called conservation practices to restore and maintain natural resources. A good example of those would be stream bank stabilization, erosion control, making sure that animals have drinking opportunities away from the creek or the river so that they aren't contaminating the water source, those kinds of things. Next slide, please, Hobie. The work we've done in communities is pretty eclectic. So for instance, we protect about 500 acres of blufflands along the Missouri River in North St. Louis County. So that provides a balance against what you all know is significant development in that area along the river. The Schultz Nature Preserve in Washington is kind of interesting if you get there, because it's nestled right behind an industrial park. So people can kind of hike and walk on their lunchtime or before or after work and get a great opportunity to enjoy nature. We partner in Hillsborough with the Crest Family Garden and Farm, which is open to the public. It provides examples of farming and gardening to the public and have greenhouses there. We protect, this is one of 6 easements we have along the Katy Trail. This one is right in St. Charles County, right on the river. And that'll actually, by virtue of a life estate that willed the property to St. Charles County, that property will actually become part of the St. Charles County Parks Program, and we'll continue to maintain the conservation easement on it, along with another 6 properties we have along the Katy Trail, which protect scenic view sheds, scenic corridors. And then lots of easements and acreage along the Hoosick Creek, which is essential to our food production and our food supply in our region. Bunch of farmers and ranchlands in that area, cattle ranches and farms. So just gives you a good idea of how we do stuff that is related to communities. Next slide. You can see over on the left, you can see an AmeriCorps group that was just at the Schultz Nature Preserve in Washington that was working on hacking away invasive species. And on the right, you can see a recent hike we did on that property I described on the Katy in St. Charles County. Last slide, please. And there you can see the breadth of our work. We do work across Missouri and Arkansas, about 80% of it being conservation easements. about 20% of it being owned, and a lot of it private, but some of it public and open to the public. So that's what we do. And I would thank you very much for letting us present. And next speaker is who? Toby?
It's Carol.
Carol. So go for it, Carol.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Excuse me while I get this pulled up here. Thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this webinar. And I'm going to talk about protecting prairies and native plantings as tools for planners. I'm going to share examples of how protected prairies benefit communities and how native plantings can help address challenges facing communities. First, a bit of information about the Missouri Prairie Foundation. It is a 57-year-old prairie conservation organization and nationally accredited land trust. And as Larry said, we are part of the Missouri Land Trust Coalition. We protect original unplowed prairie remnants. We create prairie plantings. We run the 23-year-old Grow Native Native Plant Marketing and Education Program, and we administer the Missouri Invasive Plant Council. Up until 1821, Missouri had 15 million acres of prairie, and this is all the orange color that you see on the map. And in the Ozark region, the reason you don't see a lot of prairie there is because that was not closed in forest, but open woodland. And there was actually a lot of prairie species in the Ozarks as well. This map was developed by Dr. Walter Schrader of the University of Missouri. So of that 15 million acres today, there are fewer than 45,000 scattered unplowed prairie acres as recorded in the Missouri National Heritage Database. Now, this is a staggering loss, of course, but these remnants are still incredibly important critical habitat for many species of plants and animals that can live nowhere else. And of course, where did it go? Well, we converted prairie for row crops from 1837 to the present day. Through suppression of fire, many of our prairies became closed in with trees. And of course, all the places where we live and work and go to school and shop and do business has converted prairie and other native habitats as well. What the Missouri Prairie Foundation does is it owns and manages original unplowed prairie. This is usually by purchase, although we certainly are happy when people want to donate prairie to us as well. Prairie evolved with fire. It did not evolve with invasive plants, but we have to continue with prescribed fire and control of invasive plants. We do detailed monitoring, species monitoring, because these prairies are incredibly biologically rich. And so they're very important to monitor very carefully. So it's a total of 32 tracts of land, totaling more than 4,400 acres. We're a private entity, but our prairies are open for all to enjoy on foot. And while we own and manage these prairies, we are likely going to begin holding some easements on some private remnant prairies as well. And I wanted to share just a couple of slides about one of our prairies, which is very close to Kansas City. It's just 35 miles south of downtown Kansas City, and it's right next to the town of Harrisonville. And this is an opportunity for people in a major metro area to see what the Kansas City region looked like prior to Euro-American settlement. And this is one of very few remnant prairies left in that region. It's very beautiful. And the mayor, Judy Bowman, mayor of Harrisonville, she's there in the center. I don't think she's still mayor, but she would come to our events. She always promoted it. It was really a source of pride for her that this original prairie was part of the Harrisonville community. And like a lot of communities, the city of Harrisonville has a recreation plan, and this property helped them with their objectives because it provided a place for people to walk. We have events there like the upcoming plein air painting event where artists are all over the prairie painting. So it's a very wonderful part of the community. And Snowball Hill Prairie and other prairies are extremely important in their own right. They're critical habitat for many species, as I mentioned before, but also because they are landscapes rich with native plants, they are sources of seeds for the native plant industry. And these arrows are pointing to just a few of the plant species whose seeds are collected to drive the native plant industry so that other plants can be propagated and sold, and other large areas can be seeded with prairie plantings. For all of their benefits, stormwater management, carbon storage, pollinator habitat. So many of the seeds that are prairie plantings you might see in urban areas, they all originally came from remnants. So we have to protect these remnant communities, not just prairies, but other native habitats for many reasons, but including the fact that they're seed sources. So in addition to protecting these original remnants, we also create prairie plantings and other native plantings. We are currently establishing a 40-acre prairie planting within Creve Coeur Park, and we've recently renovated 2 native bioswales at the City of Bridgeton Recreation Center grounds, and one of them is pictured here. And I mentioned that we received grant funding to do these projects that was available to nonprofits, but not to municipalities. So sometimes if you planners or you work for municipalities or you're doing projects for municipalities, keep in mind that if you come across grant funding that for projects that could benefit your community or the plans that you're working on, but you can't apply because you're a business or because you work for a municipality, a land trust might be a good partner for you. We also are, to provide another example, we're creating 50 acres of prairie plantings within the city of Joplin with some Fish and Wildlife Service funding. We have a very rich and active outreach and education program. And these are photos of a project that we helped fund last year. The artist you see here, her name is Julie Farstad, and she actually is a resident in the Marlboro neighborhood in Kansas City. And she has a project called Flowers for Marlboro. And we provided funding so that she could paint these beautiful native plant and prairie murals in that neighborhood, and provide materials for native plant education as well. And in the lower photo, you see that Julie has drawn, you can't see her whole painting, which would be off to the left, but she has a painting of prairie plants. And then she drew these circles and left a box of chalk so that community members could draw their own and really be engaged in this. So this kind of community project involving native plants can be a nice community builder. I just want to briefly touch on a few other resources that we have that may be useful to you. Through our Grow Native program, we 2 years ago launched a program called the Native Gardens of Excellence to showcase well-designed and maintained native gardens and plantings, including several that are owned and managed by municipalities, like this example, which is at Government Plaza in the city of Springfield. So these Gardens of Excellence provide places where people can go see examples of what we consider to be well designed and maintained. Some other resources, we have hundreds of free online native landscaping resources at grownative.org. We have native garden designs. We have a native landscaping ordinance template that can be useful for communities. We have a nearly complete municipal toolkit that I will let APA know about when it's done. We have our Native Gardens of Excellence program. We have hundreds of free online resources on the identification and control of invasive plants. And right now, if you go to moinvasives.org, you can find information about commenting on ongoing sales of invasive plants, and that comment period is open through May 31. We have a prairie garden grant program that might be helpful to communities with which you work. We also provide prairie planting training. For example, last year, our Director of Prairie Management provided training for St. Louis County Parks and Recreation staff and to the University of Columbia ground staff, because many places are establishing prairie plantings, but then need help with understanding how to maintain them. And lastly, last year, we launched a professional certification program. This provides a credential for native landscaping knowledge and achievement, and it advances the profession. And this can be a really useful tool if you are speccing projects. You could prefer or require, for example, that those who send in a bid be professionally certified. And my contact information is there. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I'm going to stop share now. Let's see. There. Thank you.
Now we'll turn it over to Bonnie Harper.
Great. Am I supposed to share my screen, or are you going to bring those up?
You can if you want to. I have it up too.
Okay. You can go ahead and share them.
Okay.
Oh, do you want to put it on the slideshow view?
Right. Let's see. The bar's at the top.
Okay, great. So yes, thank you all for having me present a little bit today. I'm Bonnie Harper, Executive Director with Open Space STL. We were formerly Open Space Council for the St. Louis region, so you might have known that name, but we just went through a little bit of a rebranding exercise a couple months ago, so we are now known as Open Space STL. So next slide. So our mission statement is here. So we're a nonprofit land trust that have been around since 1965. And so we work to conserve and sustain the land, water, and natural resources for the St. Louis region. We define the St. Louis region as a 100-mile radius from the city of St. Louis. So that really does encompass quite a large metropolitan region with several different counties that we work in. And if you go to the next slide. So I put this in because a lot of people are very familiar with our longest running volunteer program known as Operation Clean Stream, which is a large scale cleanup of the Merrimack River that has happened every August since 1967. So that's typically what people seem to know us for, is that we engage thousands of volunteers in that every year, and it's been going on for over 50 years now. But perhaps what you didn't know is that well, actually I shouldn't say long before Operation Clean Stream started, more so like 2 years before Operation Clean Stream started, we actually were set up as an organization to conserve and protect land. So if you go to the next slide. We actually started as Open Space Foundation before we became known as Open Space Council. And we were set up as a foundation to identify areas that can be acquired and set aside for public use to discourage improper land use and detrimental development. And so we did that through raising funds, through fundraising efforts for new open space projects. And so we started out, as I said, as a foundation doing that work, and we still continue in a very similar role today. And so in just a few minutes, I'm going to go through a handful of our most recent projects and how we and what role we played in helping to acquire a few new parks in our region. But just taking a little bit of a step back in time to the 60s, at that time, our first project that we worked on was to raise funds to buy land overlooking the Mississippi. It was along the Mississippi River bluffs in South St. Louis County, and that became what is now known as Beatree County Park. So we helped St. Louis County acquire that property through our fundraising efforts, so they could open up that as a beautiful park right overlooking the Mississippi River. And in addition to that, we helped pass the bond issue that actually helped create the St. Louis County Park System to begin with. We realized that St. Louis County really needed sort of a green belt to help curb some of the urban sprawl happening at that time. And so we helped establish the mandate for creating a park system in the first place, and then also with the creation of Beatree County Park. You may also not know that we helped with other significant natural areas in the St. Louis region. So we played a similar role in helping acquire land for Castlewood State Park. That was to help the Missouri State Park system, as well as Forest 44 Conservation Area, which is managed by the Missouri Department of Conservation now. And so, as you can kind of maybe see, those kinds of large-scale land conservation projects were to create new open space, public use opportunities, and recreational opportunities, but to also help kind of create this green belt for the region too, as the region, was really growing and expanding at that time. So, next slide. I'm just going to fast forward in time to explain a little bit about some project that we have worked on in just the past 2 years alone. So we helped the Missouri Department of Conservation acquire 70 acres of private land that was adjacent to Young Conservation Area in Jefferson County. The Young Conservation Area was already around, I think, couple thousand acres at that time. So this wasn't, a huge expansion of that area. But what I do want to point out, if you go to the next slide, sorry, I thought I was going to be sharing my screen, be able to circle what I'm talking about, but you can't actually see me moving my mouse around. But the Young Conservation Area on that map is the lower left side of that map. And so what I wanted to highlight was, if you look up near where that Merrimack River is curving around, we're looking in the city in Jefferson County, but also where Eureka spans up in that area as well. There's some rapid development going on of subdivisions encroaching further out into what was a lot of farmland and woodlands in this area. And so, even just at 70 acres of land that we helped acquire for the Young Conservation Area expansion, that's a really important buffer between that important conservation area and the LeBark Creek watershed and that ongoing residential development that's happening very close to this conservation area. This conservation area, as you can see, is near other conservation areas, and the LeBark Creek itself runs through this conservation area. And so the LeBark Creek is a very high priority conservation opportunity identified by the Missouri Department of Conservation because it's one of the last tributaries in the lower part of the Merrimack watershed that has a high biological diversity, high aquatic biological diversity still. Whereas the tributaries that enter the Merrimack River, the further you get in South St. Louis County, the more degraded those streams and creeks become. So it was really important to protect land in this watershed to protect that aquatic diversity in these tributaries. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role that we played specifically in this land acquisition. So first of all, in order for MDC to be able to add any new acreage to their current land holdings, the commissioners have to vote on that to accept new land holdings. So we helped secure some of those votes that were needed. We acted as a broker between the family that owned these 3 different tracts of land that totaled about 70 acres. We worked with the family to help them understand the process for selling their land. This was a purchase situation, not a land donation situation. However, we did work with them to negotiate a fair, land sale price that was below market value. And we did all the paperwork on their behalf. This was, an older generation of landowners, so some of this stuff was a little bit difficult for them to work through. And so we helped them, through all that process. Basically, we did it on their behalf and helped them understand how everything works working with Missouri Department of Conservation. We also provided the bulk of the funding to purchase these 3 tracts through our own, like I said, private fundraising efforts. This property was kind of a farmstead, so it had a lot of different landfill dumps around the site that the generations of landowners had used. It had and so part of what we were able to provide to this project too to really help MDC out is once MDC did become the official owner of this property, we held a number of different cleanups on the site through our volunteer programs, such as Operation Clean Stream, to remove these dumps from across the property, so that the end goal is for this property to obviously be able to be used by the public. A trail system will eventually be put in to connect to trails in the already existing young conservation area. But people can still go off trail and walk this new addition right now. But MLTC wasn't going to allow the public to do that until these sort of dump sites were cleaned up. So we were able to bring in teams to clean that up. If you want to go to the next slide. So another project that I wanted to highlight, very recent as well, this is 2021, was a 156-acre addition to Greensfelder County Park, which is a St. Louis County park in Eureka. And the map on the left, that red outline, is the property, the 156 acres that I'm referring to, which was directly adjacent to the existing Greensfelder County Park. This was the largest park expansion project for St. Louis County in over 30 years. They had not added this much to their park inventory in over 30 years. So this was kind of a big deal for St. Louis County Parks Department to be able to acquire this piece of land. So if you want to go to the next slide, I can again touch on some of the roles that we played in this particular project. So this was as you can imagine, this amount of land in this area of St. Louis County was on, a very expensive acreage to help purchase. And so we provided, we were sort of more of like a match funding partner in this situation. There were a lot of different funding partners to this project. And so, and as you can imagine, almost all types of grantors require some sort of, match funding arrangement. So we were able to help provide that source to St. Louis County for this particular project. The land that became part of Greensfelder, it had undergone a number of previous land uses. It had been an old orchard at one point. The property wasn't necessarily degraded, but it was not a pristine, wilderness conservation land either. And some of the funders to this project, they would have, I guess, preferred the land to be in that state if they were going to contribute a significant amount of funds to it. But we were able to help talk those funders around, because we helped develop the habitat restoration plan in partnership with St. Louis County Parks. And then we are actually listed in that plan as being the implementing agency for that plan in terms of establishing our volunteer program at Greensfelder Park, our Community Stewardship Alliance, to implement different phases of that habitat restoration plan. So that again brought a little bit of incentives to other funding parties to actually agree to being a funding partner to this project and help get it over the line, so to speak. And that this park was, or this extension to Greensfelder, was officially opened in June of 2021. If you want to go to the next slide. The last project that I'm going to talk about is our most recent one that just happened at the end of 2022. So this is 6 acres of remnant wetland in the city of Brentwood. The city of Brentwood has been doing a lot of planning in terms of stormwater mitigation, stormwater management planning, known as their Brentwood Bound Plan, to help deal with a lot of flooding issues that they've been having from flash floods occurring more frequently in intensity in this area. And so in that Brentwood Bound Plan, if you look at that area of green space that's identified just sort of south of that metro parking garage, this is the wetland area that I'm talking about. These acres are in the floodplain of Deer Creek, and Deer Creek is one of the creeks that Brentwood is really trying to work on to help mitigate flooding problems and really treat it more as a natural resource asset to the community instead of the liability that it kind of has traditionally been seen as. And so in order for the city to really fully be able to do this, they really needed to take ownership of this property and acquire this to be part of city-owned land that's going to become a public wetland arboretum once its restoration is finally complete. So we were able to provide a portion of funding to the city of Brentwood to help purchase this land. It had been owned by Bi-State Development Agency. And we're also able to, similar to the Greensfelder example, we're going to establish a restoration program for this area to restore a lot of the natural wetland functions and help do a lot more wetland planting of this site. And the city of Brentwood's going to be putting a boardwalk through it and an educational interpretive signage about the importance of floodplains and wetlands. And it's eventually it will actually help control stormwater as part of their overall stormwater management plan as well. So we just broke ground on April 13th. So yeah, just last week on the beginning stages of the restoration work for this this new city park. So if you want to go to the last slide, maybe the last slide, almost the last slide. So I just wanted to summarize. We play a lot of different roles, I guess, in land protection in cities or counties and the Metro St. Louis region. So in all of the cases, and almost always, we are usually a funding partner to this, whether that's funding as a match partner or as the bulk of the funding needed for land acquisitions. We can be a liaison between landowners looking to sell their property or donate their property to a city or state agency or county agency. We can kind of handle all of that, you know, paperwork, so to speak, or just explaining the process to landowners and maybe easing any concerns they might have working with a city or county or state agency. In some cases, we tend to not hold land permanently ourselves as like Missouri Prayer Foundation or Ozark Land Trust, but we can hold land temporarily until a city or county is ready to fully accept it as part of their own land holdings. And so in some cases, a landowner might want to sell their land more quickly than a city or county can, you know, handle that real estate transaction. And so we might be able to step in and handle those processes a bit quicker and have a bit less red tape to go through. And that might be a bit more appealing for a landowner to work with instead of a city or county or state agency. We can help some, you know, partners to these projects, other funders, they might like to see certain conditions such as restoration work happen, and we can help, you know, bring those incentives to the table. And as I mentioned, we don't just walk away from our project usually after a city or state has acquired new open space. We're there to help really maintain that open space as well. Our volunteer programs are set up with the specific objectives to help cities and counties maintain their natural areas of invasive species, do new planting projects. So we're here for the long term as a long-term partner. So that's just a little bit of a summary of how we have what we've been up to in the region over the past few years. And the last slide has my contact information. So yes, happy to answer any questions at any point. I don't know if we have time during this webinar, but certainly feel free to email me or call me.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Next, we'll turn it over to Abby Kinney.
Can you all see my screen? All right. Should be going on full screen now. Okay, great. Hi, my name is Abby Kinney. I'm an urban planner out of Multi-Studio in Kansas City. I've been working for the past couple of years with the Marlboro Community Land Trust, who will be talking a little bit about what they do more broadly. But I am here to talk about a specific project that I've been working on with them and another individual named Monty, which I'll talk about in a moment. And that is the redevelopment of a school that has been decommissioned in their neighborhood that they have acquired. So just to give you some context of this site, it is an old elementary school, or formerly an elementary school, that is nestled in a really walkable neighborhood context, close to transit, surrounded by single family housing, mostly, many of which are land trust housing. And this is the really abbreviated history of the school, but it's been standing for a long time. It was decommissioned in 2007. Over the past 15 years or so, there have been many unsuccessful attempts for developers to come in and do a big project. And fast forward to 2021, MCLT had the opportunity to acquire the site, which I think is a really special opportunity for the community to really drive this development project and really benefit from what happens on this site. So it's really exciting. We were brought on with Monty Anderson back in 2021. I'm assisting with the planning or urban design oriented work, and Monty he's really the real estate mind who's helping to advise on every step of the process for the real estate piece of this. He has been doing what I will call unicorn real estate development projects, difficult projects, for over 3 decades through his group called Options Real Estate. He's one of the co-founders of Incremental Development Alliance, which is a nonprofit that focuses on building local capacity for people who are doing these kinds of projects. And he's also co-founder of Neighborhood Evolution, which is his development consulting firm that he runs with Bernice Radel. And Becca McQuillan is, of course, former executive director. She was unable to join us today to talk about this, but she is now the director of development for the Marlboro Community Land Trust and continues to be involved in this project. So what we've been saying basically throughout this entire process is, so we've been saying, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a whole community to redevelop a building. And that's really the way that we've been thinking of, everything from community engagement all the way to property management, which we're not there yet, but we will be there. And so really the goal of this, with MCLT in the middle, this flywheel graphic, which this is Monty's graphic, not mine, but it shows you all the steps of going through a development project, from acquisitions to improvements, which is where we're at now, to leasing and selling. And the goal is for us to bring in members of the community to the extent we can throughout this entire process, which we've had some great success with, and been able to involve not just community members in the community engagement, kind of official community engagement phase of this project, but also when we're looking at hiring contractors and bringing on architectural professionals, really making this a community-driven process. And when we first started working on this with the Marlboro Community Land Trust, that's really the approach that we took with thinking about what we can even do with this building. It's an old school building. There's a lot of different size spaces, different types of spaces. There's an old cafeteria, there's an old gymnasium, there's a theater, there's old offices. So there's a lot of different spaces, and this is a development project that is really intended to meet the market. So we're not going in and investing $20 million to just completely change the character of this building. We would really like to keep a lot of the integrity of this structure intact, which is important to the community as well. And so we really led with this question of what is missing from the community, and how can this building serve as a platform for bringing in local businesses, for actually meeting the direct needs of the people who are in the neighborhood today. So this isn't about, doing a big luxury development and trying to attract in a different market that doesn't currently exist. We're really intending to meet the market that's here and right-sizing space based on what the need is. And so we had a great workshop where we actually had floor plans and filled out spaces and came up with ideas. And there are even some people that are in the neighborhood who have businesses now that wanted to basically design the space that they'll be in one day, which is really exciting and is, I think, a fun way to think about how to reutilize these schools that become decommissioned, which I don't know about St. Louis, but Kansas City has many buildings like this, unfortunately, that are just sitting in the middle of neighborhoods and really need kind of a fresh perspective. So the precedent project that we've been really basing this on is called Tyler Station in Dallas, Texas, and it's one of Monty Anderson's projects that he did, I think, over a decade ago. This is often referred to as a magical co-op building, and so we're hoping that this project will become a magical co-op building for Marlboro, but truly, meeting a need for every type of person in the neighborhood. So whether you have children and you need a daycare or something for your kids to do, or even adolescents to do, as well as having third spaces, like maybe a place to have some coffee or to get something to eat. Maybe we have an old gymnasium, maybe you can have a dance school or martial arts, different kinds of movement studios. So we'd really like to draw on the spaces as they were used when it was an elementary school, and allow that to inform what the future uses of these spaces are. So right now we're working on achieving first floor occupancy. So this is the first floor of the building, the future first floor. We're moving a couple of things around, but for the most part, you can see where the old gymnasium was, and there's a lot of interesting potential uses. We even talked the other day that maybe a daycare could go in there part-time as well. We have an old cafeteria on the south side, which is on the true south there, which could be commercial kitchens. It could be a grocer, a restaurant. And we also have plenty of spaces for offices or a salon or professional services. So right now we're working with the architect. We're about to bring on a broker to really marry the design outcomes with what people would like to use space for. And so this is what our team and the Land Trust will be really working to achieve throughout the next year to achieve that first floor occupancy. And between 2021 and now, we have really been working through a lot of things in the background. We're officially under construction, so there's a new roof. It's finally dry and clean on the inside, and the environmentals have been cleaned up, which is very exciting. And we have electricity, which is awesome. But in the background between 2021 and now, we've been working on zoning. The Land Trust has done significant cleaning. They have, found bankers, investors, philanthropic dollars to help support phase one. And so there's a mix of all of those things involved in this project, which I think is actually a really key component of making these types of projects work. It's not all philanthropic dollars, it's not all banking and lending, but getting the right mix to support these kinds of projects, I think, is really important. And I think that that's why I think that lends itself really well to a land trust being the stewards of a site like this. Not just this site, but hopefully other sites in the future where the Land Trust, who's going to be a long-term owner, can get that kind of support to make these projects work. So I'll just fly through these because I know we're running out of time, but this is a picture of the front of it. So you can see it's a really pretty building. And we're going to be hopefully putting in new windows very soon here. This is from a tour that we did recently of the site with the architects and the contractor and the MEP engineer. So going through the building and verifying where the elevator will go, how the entrances will work. Here's us on the roof. There's my friend Bernice climbing out of this little hole to get on the roof. Kind of funny. And that's Monty there and Megan behind him. So really exciting stuff. I know it looks messy and dirty on the inside, but it was a lot worse 2 years ago. And I'm hoping that these are going to be really fun before photos one day, and we're going to have really nice looking after photos in about a year from now. So yeah, just photos of some of the space, really interesting architectural elements inside there too. So Megan, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it to you.
Great. And I think, Hobie, you have my slide.
Yes.
So Marlboro Community Land Trust is a very different type of a land trust. We, instead of setting aside land for environmental purposes, we are setting aside land for affordable housing. So it is a similar process in that we are taking the land out of the typical real estate speculation, setting it aside and saying this home, this land will always be used for individuals earning below area median income. So this is a very busy slide, but I will try to walk you through basically the tenets of the Community Land Trust. So we are a tax exempt nonprofit organization, just like the many ones that have spoken before me. We acquire property to create affordable housing. So we do that either by renovating homes that have been abandoned or by acquiring property from the Kansas City Land Bank and building new homes. We're then going to sell those homes at a subsidized price to individuals who are eligible, basically earning under the Kansas City, Missouri area median income. Typically, they are first-time home buyers. We will retain ownership of the land and the buyer will have ownership of the home. So it is a shared equity model. If you look down in that lower left corner, you'll see eligible buyers. So primarily we're looking for people who are earning below area median income. So individuals who are struggling to get into the home ownership market. This is not about rental. It is about home ownership and building wealth. So the candidates, potential buyers apply. They are going through a screening process because they do have to have a mortgage in order to acquire the property. So they're working with one of our banking relationships, determining if they qualify for a mortgage. Once they do, and they have completed some other basic tenets just to make sure they're familiar with what they're getting into, this shared equity model, they're in a pool of buyers. And when each new property is completed, we reach out to the buyers and say, here's what we have available, who is interested. If there are multiple buyers who are interested in a home and they are all qualified, that is when we would get into a buyer selection process. So the board of Marlboro Community Land Trust, which I'm going to just divert for a second to tell you a little bit more about the board. Community Land Trust boards are tripartite boards, so 3 parts. 1/3 of the board is homeowners, individuals who actually own Community Land Trust homes. 1/3 are neighbors living in the neighborhood where the Community Land Trust is working. And 1/3 are outside experts. So really 2/3 of the board is controlled by the neighborhood. So we want the neighborhood to be able to choose the buyer if there are multiple buyers. So there is a selection strategy that is set out by the board to determine who would get the home if there are multiple qualified buyers. That buyer is going to agree to a 99-year ground lease. So basically we're saying, you, Mr. Homeowner, you're buying the home, we're going to lease the land to you for 99 years. And we do 99 years because we don't want the buyers to be suspicious that this is some sort of a deal or a program that we're going to renege on. So it's basically the life of their selves. They use the land as their own. In the state of Missouri, they paid their own real estate taxes. And they're actually paying taxes on the land and the home. However, in Marlboro, we have managed to create an urban renewal area, which means that the taxes on all of these homes are abated for 10 years. So that does give those individual homeowners, again, who are in the low and moderate income range, a chance to kind of get into the house, get used to paying the mortgage before adding on the property taxes as well. The last bullet point under the eligible buyers is full support of MCLT. So the Community Land Trust is standing behind those buyers. And I will call that out by sharing that less than 0.5% of Community Land Trust homes end in foreclosure. There are many reasons for that, but basically, if the homeowner gets a notice of a late payment, the land is owned by us, so we get the same notice. We are in constant communication with those homeowners, so we can reach out and say, okay, what's happening? Some examples of what we have heard. Well, I lost my job, I have a new one, but I don't start for 2 weeks and I don't get paid for another 2 weeks after that, and I'm late on my payment. The land trust can then try to assist that buyer in, well, let's see if we can find you a small dollar loan for a short period of time. Let's see if we can work so that we can move, the land trust could make this payment, we'll move it to the end of your mortgage and you can make the payment then. So again, trying to keep that property owned by that low income individual homeowner. In the worst case scenario, a individual may say this just isn't working. In that situation, the land trust can purchase the home back from the buyer and resell it to another eligible buyer, and that individual walks away without a foreclosure on their record. So the process for purchasing the house is very similar to a market rate house, with the exception that that individual buyer is getting a 20% discount on the price. And we'll walk through that in the right-hand side resale formula in just a minute. But the difference really comes when that individual is selling. They have agreed to a restricted resale value. So they'll get back what they've invested in the home, and they will get a portion of the appreciation. The rest of the appreciation of the home stays with the home, which keeps the price down for the next low to moderate income buyer. Thus, that subsidy that we started with at 20% subsidy continues in perpetuity, buyer to buyer, and no additional subsidy is needed. So if we walk quickly through the resale formula, let's say that MCLT has rehabbed a house and the market says that house is worth $100,000. We say, great, we're going to sell it for 20% less. So we're going to find a buyer that qualifies. We're going to sell it to them for $80,000. They're going to live there as long as they like. There's no restrictions. When they are ready to buy it or sell, which oftentimes is because their family has grown, or they want to live in a different area, or they've gotten a different job. Typical reasons that people sell their home, and many of our buyers are first-time buyers. They will receive back their equity, just like in a market rate home. So they'll get back all of the principal payments that they've retired, and they will get back their deposit if they have made one. And they will be, of course, they will have paid the interest cost that they've accrued over the years that they're living there. But basically, they're getting back their original investment, and they're getting a portion of the market appreciation. So we said this house sold appraised for $100,000 when it sold to this buyer. Now it's, let's say, 7 years later, and it appraises for $150,000. So the difference between those two appraised values is $50,000. That first buyer is going to get 25% of that. So that buyer is going to walk away with what they invested minus interest they paid plus $12,500. Typically, our buyers go on to buy market rate homes after their first community land trust home. Well, the rest of that 75% of that market appreciation stays with the house. So we sold that house to the first buyer for $80,000. Now we've given that first buyer $12,500. The new price of the house is $92,500, not the $150,000 that it would be if it went to market rate. And thus the cycle repeats with somebody else being able to get a home for $92,500 as opposed to $150,000. I'm not sure what questions that may bring up your mind. Again, I know that we are close on time, but this is, again, it's just a different way to use land because, and it's become very popular because of the affordable housing crisis. And if you have looked at real estate or affordable housing, you'll see that the majority of affordable housing is rental. And that continues to concentrate the wealth in the landowner's space, right? Their pocket. So that home ownership is really what makes the land trust an important, valuable asset. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Looks like we have a little time for question and answer. I'd like to start off by just saying that having listened to the other speakers, have any of you noticed any similarities and differences between land trusts operating in urban, suburban, rural areas and with environmental versus social goals? So if anybody has anything to say, or if any of the attendees have any questions, we can go to those now.
Well, I'll just share one piece of information. So community land trusts actually began in the 1960s as a response to a rural situation. And it was really in response to the civil rights movement, where Black farmers were really struggling to be able to purchase land that they could then farm and make money from. So the first land trust was in the rural area about the mid-1980s. It started to become a tool for the urban areas, recognizing that the gentrification that was causing issues could be dispelled by utilizing that community land trust. Marlboro Community Land Trust is the first community land trust in the Kansas City, Missouri area, but there are 275 community land trusts across the country. So it's not a new concept.
Thank you, Megan. Let's see, it looks like there's a question in the chat from Astri asking, did you find any issues with finding banks willing to partner with you for the CLT? Did you say that you only do the CLT model with newly built homes?
No, we rehab homes and build new, and we were fortunate that there is a large community land trust that's been operating in Lawrence, Kansas for about 15 years, and Capital Federal is their lender. So they were willing to take on working with Marlboro Community Land Trust. And of course, no banker wants to get left out. So then everybody else was like, oh, we can use this for our Community Reinvestment Act dollars. So it has worked out pretty well that we've gotten other banks on board. We now have 5 options.
There's another question in the chat. Is the land trust a condominium form of ownership? I don't understand how the land and structure could be held in different ownerships. Usually that would take the form of a condominium type of ownership. Is that the case?
It is similar to a condominium type of ownership. We do not do a deed restriction. We use a ground lease document, and that basically governs the relationship between the two parties. It is allowed in Missouri, even though Missouri does not separate the appraisal of the land and the home as they do in Kansas. But it is basically, we are owning the land and leasing it to the homeowner. So similar to a condominium practice.
I guess I had a question. I heard a lot of talk about kind of being a liaison between governments and then individuals or businesses. And that seems like it's a real benefit of the land trust model, of the nonprofit model, that they can do things that governments can't do while pursuing communal goals at the same time. So I wonder if anybody has any stories or responses to that.
Yeah, I mean, Bonnie related kind of the role that they play in that in land, temporary land holding and transfer, which I think is super important. And there are some national groups like Trust for Public Land and Conservation Fund who do that kind of work also. We just are in the process of finishing one that was very interesting. It was a piece of property that the Doe Run lead mining company, as a result of a federal consent decree, had to transfer into permanent protection, and the Missouri Department of Conservation couldn't accept it temporarily because it was not in the correct assessment category that allowed them, the commission's rules, to accept it. So they said, will you accept it temporarily, get the land basically down assessed to agricultural assessment, and then convey the property to us. And we are doing that, but then retaining a permanent conservation easement on the land. So it's a way that we were able to accommodate them in a very different kind of model, but similar to what Bonnie was describing in playing a role with respect to the bridge between the governmental organization and the nonprofit. And I think you see that a lot, that like Trust for Public Land and Conservation Fund that I mentioned has in large part their business model. It's finding funds to protect land, knowing that a lot of times government has to go through a lot of hoops to either get the money or to go through the right kinds of regulatory processes in order to accept the land. So that bridge is really important.
Yeah, I guess I just piggyback on what Larry said. In addition to what he kind of touched on the examples I gave, but we also have had a few instances where people have wanted to work directly with us because they just did not like the idea of working with certain councilmen or alder people. They had issues with, we don't really get into politics ourselves or anything like that. So we're just like, if this is the objective is to protect your land, and then we'll work with you on that and let us deal, with the city or government agency. They just didn't want to have to have any contact with them at all. And they wanted to leave that with us. So yeah, sometimes we encounter situations like that. So
yeah, that's right.
We're happy to help in those situations.
I just wanted to add a good example of that on kind of a bigger scale is the Merrimack Dam project, right? The Merrimack Dam project just caused basically resentment toward the government for so long that nobody wanted to really deal with them in certain parts of the Merrimack. But nonprofits were able to come in and say, we still want to, do work along the river. And how can we do that in a way that makes you feel safe and trusted? That may be the most extreme example, and Bonnie cited probably a more realistic day-to-day example, but there are all sorts of reasons why groups would rather work with a nonprofit. So
I'd like to add something too, that kind of the reverse is true also in terms of funding. Sometimes a municipality might receive funding or some other entity or maybe if funding allows for establishment, say, of a planting, or it might allow for acquisition of land, but it does not provide money for stewardship of that land, be it biological stewardship or infrastructure stewardship or what have you. And so, for example, the city of Joplin received some funding, but they didn't have really the staffing to do the prairie planting. So work with the land trust, or MU received a grant to put in a planting, and the grant provided some funding for education, how to educate their staff, but they needed a trainer to do that. So that's another way. Sometimes the funding goes to the municipality or the entity, or maybe you have a building project where there's funding for the whole building project. And, maybe the entity is really good on the infrastructure, but they need help on the green space part of it, so they could work with the land trust on that. So just ways to be nimble and kind of make the most of funding that's out there.
And we haven't talked about this much, but a big shout out to the Missouri Department of Conservation. They have instituted a new land partnership conservation program. They've instituted community conservation goals and programs. So they're really trying to figure out ways that they can be helpful both in the traditional kinds of projects, but also kind of in more populated areas as well. So, yep.
Looks like we have a question for Abby in the chat about whether there's an emphasis on prioritizing green building standards for the school renovation.
So short answer is yes. So we are going to be, using high efficiency everything, making sure that this is as efficient of a building as possible, and are using materials that have sustainability in mind. I think something else that isn't always talked about with green building standards, but is important, is that this school is really located. It's located in a walkable neighborhood. It's close to transit. The neighborhood currently has, it's basically a goods and services desert. So there's an extreme need for, not just using trips to go to employment purposes, but a lot of people have to drive several miles to go to a grocery store, to get some milk or eggs or something to eat, or go to, for kids to have activities to do. And so being in this corridor where there's this lack of all of those things for all ages, and being close to transit, I think there's this transit sustainability piece that is really important, so that people will be able to take a bus or walk or bike to get to this location, and for a variety of different needs.
Thanks, Abby. Looks like we have another question for Megan. Has your affordable housing CLT model sought to focus on certain neighborhoods, or I guess areas within the neighborhood, or group the homes near each other, or distribute them throughout the community? How do you go about recruiting community and homeowner board members, and how large is the board?
Great questions. First of all, we have tried to congregate the homes that we're working on. There is actually a green corridor that goes through Marlboro. There is a beautiful site called Nature and Play, which is at 81st and Truce, which is kind of the head of the neighborhood, where there is a beautiful reworked storm basin. So we have followed along that green path up to a park called Arno Park. So we have tried to get the houses close to that green line, wanting to be aware of the importance of nature. In addition, on the houses, we're working to partner with Heartland Conservation Alliance to see what we can do in terms of native plantings in the lawns or grounds of the homes, because having a grass lawn for many low to moderate income individuals is just really more of a problem. So trying to figure out how we can use native plants. In terms of, what was the other part?
Recruiting the board members.
Oh, recruiting
and the size of the board.
Yes, so the board is 12 members. So anyone who owns a CLT home, which right now we have 3 homeowners, so they're offered a board spot. Not all of them choose to join. So then we would fill it with more neighbors. Because Marlboro Community Coalition, which was actually the organization that created Marlboro Community Land Trust, is extremely active in the community. We have been very fortunate in having many board members who want to participate in the governing of the land trust. Because we are getting funding from the federal government, We also are a designated CHODO organization, which means that 51% of our board members must be earning under the area median income of the neighborhood, or must own a business or be producing a service in that neighborhood. So the board is really kept to the individuals who are earning below area median income.
Okay, well, I think that's the last of the questions we have in the chat. If anybody has any closing thoughts they want to add. I think one thing that I'm struck by is that after listening to all the projects is that conservation and recreation aren't just things that happen in the countryside, and that the need for affordable housing isn't just in the big cities. So I think the panelists did a good job about talking about how land trusts can help any community.
Well, Hobie, I think if that's the conclusion of our event, I would like to thank the panelists for taking the time out of their busy schedules to provide us with this education. I found it really, really useful and really enjoyable. It was a great panel, some really great presentations, and I'd like to thank you. And so with that, with no further questions, I think that concludes our event. And don't forget, our next month we are talking about zoning and talking with the director of planning with Minneapolis, with the senior planner from the city of Buffalo, and with the author of Arbitrary Lines. So make sure that everyone signs up for that. And again, thank you everyone that was on the panel. Really appreciated it. All right, everyone have a good one.
Thanks.